Welcome back to Eschatology Matters on the Fight Laugh Feast Network and available on Boniface Media. If you want to start reading the Puritans, but you don't know where to begin, Puritan Treasures for Today from Reformation Heritage Books makes the riches of these godly writers of old accessible for the modern reader. With updated language and helpful introductions, these classic works from John Owen, Jeremiah Burroughs, and more are the perfect starting point for the curious reader. So you can learn more about those Puritan treasures for today at heritagebooks.org/Puritan treasures. If you purchase that set, be sure to enter the code EMatters, code EMatters for 10% off your order. I'm joined today by Dr. Sam Parkinson from quite a ways away. So Dr. Parkison, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
So Sam, you do a lot of stuff. So I ran into you. You and I are both Midwestern grads. I ran into you there. I was aware of some of your writing. You write As Many People Breathe. You're one of those gifted individuals. So you've got several books, and I want you to mention some of those because one of them is coming out. It'll probably coincide with the release date of this episode. It'll probably be hitting Amazon and the shelves right at that point. But you serve as director at Abu Dhabi Extension of Gulf Theological Seminary. Just walk us into what are you up to, Sam, and what is your writing looking like these days?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I 2 years ago moved my family from Middle America, Kansas City, where I was pastoring and teaching as an adjunct professor at Midwestern Seminary. Picked up our lives and we moved to Abu Dhabi, which is the capital emirate of the United Arab Emirates. So Dubai is a well-known emirate. It's one of our neighbors here. And I work at a seminary called the Gulf Theological Seminary. And it's a excellent institution, if I do say so myself. We get students from all over the world, and we have a really unique opportunity to make an impact on the region here, the surrounding region here in the Middle East, but also far and beyond, because many of our students are coming here from all over the world, and they take years of theological training and go back to their home countries and Lord willing, serve in churches and plant churches and pastor churches and that sort of thing. So that's a little bit about the ministry that I'm up to. I'm the theology professor, one of the theology professors here at the seminary, teach in Abu Dhabi and also in Dubai. And then also a new post of mine is that I'm the director of publishing at Credo. So credomag.com is where you can find more stuff there. And yeah, I'm basically the first and only project with that title right now. Is a series of books that Matthew Barrett and I are editing called the Contemplating God series. This is going to come out with Crossway, so it'll be a short series of introductions to classical theology for the lay reader. And so that's one thing that I'm working on. And then, as you mentioned, there's several other writing projects that would love to mention. First of all is a book that I co-wrote with some friends, Proclaiming the Triune God. Co-wrote that with Matthew Barrett and Ronnie Kurtz and Joseph Lanier. Several years ago, we were pastoring the same church together, and we preached a sermon series on the doctrine of the Trinity, and we went back to those sermons and heavily edited them and put them together and turned them into some chapters for this book. So Proclaiming the Triune God, that comes out in October. But then also this book, this a little bit more relevant for your podcast, Josh, is the To Gaze Upon God, the Beatific Vision in Doctrine, Tradition, and Practice. So kind of a retrieval book on the doctrine of the Beatific Vision. And that has been a tremendous labor of love over the past year and a half or so. And I'm really excited to see that come onto bookshelves and into pastors' offices and things like that. So, so we may talk a little bit about that, the Beatific Vision. And then lastly, right now, I'm currently working on a book on eschatology, a dogmatics book on eschatology. So this is with a series of Christian dogmatics books that Matthew Barrett and Craig Carter are editing with B&H Academic. And I'm currently under the gun with the due date for that book. And so I was working on it before we got on this call, and I'll probably go back to working on it as soon as we get off. So.
The life of a writer. No, I appreciate you carving the time out for sure. Yeah, Beatific Vision is one thing I wanted to push in on. So you mentioned the book that you guys kind of co-wrote together. It was kind of, the extension or extrapolation of some sermons that you guys had taught. And one of the things that I really appreciated about some of the, I guess, marketing materials, but just the way you guys talked about that was you wanted that to be actually helpful for pastors. You wanted it to actually hit home
Mhm.
in the pew. That's one thing I really appreciate about writing, that can not only hit some of those high notes of, academic, doctrinal precision, but also then apply it in a way that's, digestible for the person in the pew, so to speak. Walk us into a little bit of the beatific vision thing. So you mentioned to gaze upon God. Kudos on the cover, by the way. The cover design's fantastic. What exactly might the beatific vision be for a lay reader who's not introduced to this? I suspect some people may hear that term and they may think, something of, they may think it's something it's not. So just walk us into that a little bit if you could.
Sure. Yeah, I have a short definition and a longer definition. So I'll just start with the short definition, and then maybe we can ease our way into some portions of the longer definition. But the beatific vision, it's beatific just means blessed or happy. And what we're talking about when we talk about the beatific vision is the blessed hope of seeing God in the eschaton. And I would say that it really comes down to what makes heaven heaven. The question, what makes heaven heaven? For the vast majority of church history across traditional lines, the answer to that question was not reunion with departed loved ones. It was not the ability to sit on clouds and play harps or something like that. It was the beatific vision, the hope of seeing God. And this is a hope that is repeated all throughout the scriptures. It is the thing that Moses was asking for when he's up on Mount Horeb and he's talking with Yahweh and he asks to see God's glory in Exodus 33. And then when he's granted a partial version of it in Exodus 34, it's the thing that David pines after in Psalm 27 when he says, "One thing have I asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple." It's the thing that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 13, when we will one day see and know, even as we are seen and known. It's the thing that John talks about in 1 John chapter 3, verse 2, when he says that what we will be, we do not yet know, but we know that we will be like him because we shall see him as he is. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, in Revelation 22, verse 4, this is the end of the end of the end, when all the saints are gathered before the throne of God and before the Lamb, and it says that they will see his face. And so that's what we're talking about. I think that for people that this language of the beatific vision, sometimes it can sound kind of esoteric or mystical or too Roman Catholic or something like that. And one of the things I like to mention, though, is that people, in some sense, I think people are already primed and ready to receive the beatific vision. If I could just read a very short portion from the introduction to my book here. I say, as a final word of preface, it's worth mentioning that while evangelicals, particularly of the reform variety like myself, may be unfamiliar with the doctrine of the beatific vision, consciously speaking, they're probably already primed and ready to embrace it. In fact, they may even believe it without knowing as much. Christian hedonists who have learned with John Piper that God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him, those who have come to agree with Piper that the chief delight of the soul is seeing and savoring Christ, are ready to embrace the beatific vision. If one has learned from C.S. Lewis to ache for the stab of joy, to reject playing with mud pies in the slums for the sake of a holiday at sea, and to go joyfully further up and further into Aslan's country forever, one is ready to embrace the beatific vision. If one has learned from Jonathan Edwards that heaven is a world of love, one is ready to embrace the beatific vision. If one has learned to pray with Augustine, "Thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee," one is ready for the beatific vision. All these lessons that so many Reformed evangelicals have learned have learned, traffic in the blessed hope of the beatific vision. They may therefore proceed with confidence. So I like to preface the doctrine that way because even though it feels distant and esoteric, I think that the material is already there to get us excited about the beatific vision, and it's just a matter of connecting the dots between what we are consciously sort of holding on to and then what the tradition of the Christian faith, our great heritage has, how our great heritage has actually expressed that great hope. So
Yeah. So you did I was going to ask you about some of the scriptures that point us to that, but you kind of walked us through that. So thank you for that. So the beatific vision, I'm thinking two things, because I'm kind of thinking why is that? I think in many circles, if not a foreign concept, maybe a neglected doctrine, or however you'd want to phrase that. Well, let's just ask that first. So, like, is this a historical doctrine? I suspect you're going to say yes, but like, walk me into like how is it that it seems to be neglected today? Am I wrong to think that this is neglected today? Because, you mentioned as far as people going, thinking of heaven, and this is a place to be reunited with loved ones. There's that sort of maybe I'm trying to say it nicely, but there's that sort of kind of common level parlance that we speak about, at funerals or something like that. Somebody will be like, well, they're not in pain and they're going to see their loved ones. We understand those kind of urges, but there's also our doctrinal beliefs about what heaven looks like, and it seems, at least at first glance, that beatific vision doesn't usually make its way into that in our day and age. Has this become a neglected doctrine, and if so, why do you think that might be?
totally, yeah, and that's a big burden of the book is to hopefully take a step forward in alleviating that problem, because I think it is a neglected doctrine, and monolithic causes are always suspect. So it's hard to sort of identify one single reason why, but just in general, you can point. I mean, you can point to a handful of things. You can point to the fact that in general, evangelicals today in our late modern moment tend to be pretty detached from the Christian heritage that has come before us. And that is in some ways a product of modernistic thinking. The Enlightenment, the Enlightenment, the essay called Enlightenment by Immanuel Kant, he sort of champions the freedom, enlightenment. He portrays it as freeing ourselves from the dogmatic chains that keep us in a state of intellectual infancy. And so we're almost incentivized to detach ourselves from the Christian tradition that has gone before us just by being moderns. It's part of the air that we breathe, and so already we're not set up very well to retain this doctrine. And a big part of the classical retrieval movement, very broad sort of movement of theology, a big part of that is to basically meet that issue and sort of reconnect modern evangelical Christians with their own Christian heritage. So I think that's one thing you can point to. But another thing is that, and kind of dovetailing with that, Michael Allen, in his book Grounded in Heaven, which is another very important book on the beatific vision, he talks about a kind of eschatological secularization that occurs. And in some ways, it is the product of an overreaction to a legitimate problem. So if you just go back in time, a couple of decades, when N.T. Wright explodes on the scene with his book Surprised by Hope, and he shares this insight that the hope of the Christian life is not to die and go to a disembodied state in heaven. That's not the hope of the Christian life. The hope of the Christian life is not to die and become an angel, or to die and have, sprout wings and become an angel. The hope of the Christian life is new creation. Okay, now when he says it's kind of weird for us to look back decades later and read read a book like Surprised by Hope, because I am not surprised at all by that vision of eschatology, by saying what we're after is new creation. But at the time, that was novel. That was controversial. He was making controversial claims because, and even still today, popular conceptions of heaven tend to be very ethereal. The heaven is the end of the Christian life is to die and to depart from heaven, depart from earth, and go to the floaty cloud place, where you can sit with chubby cherubs and wings and harps and basically do nothing. That's, that is the great hope of the Christian life. And N.T. Wright comes along and says, no, that the hope of the New Testament is one of new creation. It's one of the cosmos being resurrected in a similar way that our bodies will be resurrected. So no, we're not looking for a disembodied sort of eschatological state. And what Michael Allen points out is that is a crucial insight. But sometimes what can happen with the retrieval of that sort of new creation aspect of eschatology is a sense of suspicion for anything that seems a little bit too mystical or ethereal or spiritual and not physical, right? So there's a great push to sort of say, make eschatology earthy again. And that's a good thing insofar as it goes. But N.T. Wright in particular, you're not going to see him talk about the Beatific Vision very much. And you're going to see this sort of repeated even further, not in N.T. Wright circles, but even in some Reformed Dutch circles as well, where the vision of eschatological is very, it's very material, which is good and fine, so long as the burning hearth of the new heavens and the new earth is this experience of the Beatific Vision. And so for some, as a result of basically trying to avoid a far too ethereal eschatology, they have swung the pendulum in the opposite direction into what Allen calls an eschatological secularism, or an eschatological kind of materialism, where we're basically jettisoning the deeply spiritual experience of the Beatific Vision. But the great thing about the heritage of the Beatific Vision in the contemplations of Christians throughout the ages is that they never sort of sharply divided between those things. Even Thomas Aquinas, he gets kind of a bad rap. I disagree with a lot of the ways that he's sort of portrayed in articulating the Beatific Vision as making resurrection optional. He doesn't make resurrection optional in the Beatific Vision. So really none of these great thinkers, especially going back to Augustine in particular, they make the experience of a resurrected cosmos deeply central to their eschatological vision. But the Beatific Vision is the thing that basically enlivens the whole frame of the eschaton. It is lighted up by the light of God's glory in Christ's face there in the Beatific Vision. Right. So we don't have to choose between those things, and I'm not sure people are aware of that. And so, yeah, we're definitely trying to, with retrieving a doctrine like the Beatific Vision, we're trying to sort of bring back something that was jettisoned without foregoing any of the really important insights that have been developed in the last several decades of the importance of new creation in our eschatology.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, so it's almost like the Beatific Vision is kind of that anchor point of the new heavens and the new earth being something that is both spiritual renewal, the heavens descending, so to speak. It's something heavenly, but it's also something of a new creation of what God has made. So like the Beatific Vision is kind of like the anchor, because I'm with you. When I read Surprised by Hope, I was so unsurprised by what I read. I was kind of mystified that how would somebody have been surprised by this? But I think you're right. And you hear it, again, you hear it in common parlance from Christians, but you also see it in Christian writings where really the eternal state is something that is bifurcated from the physical, or bifurcated from the creational order itself. So you have this like really encouraging retrieval or renewal maybe of this new heavens, new earth, of what God has actually made, that renewal. You see a lot of that within the last couple of decades. you're kind of, if I'm hearing you right, you're kind of making the point that beatific vision is kind of the thing that unites those two. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, well, and the beatific vision and the resurrection are compatible doctrines, and really, when you're looking at someone like Aquinas, or also especially Johann Gerhard, the Lutheran scholastic theologian, they both talk about they speculate about these powers of our new bodies. So, all the theologians, whenever they're talking about the resurrection, there's this big mystery of okay, there's continuity and discontinuity between our bodies now and our resurrected bodies, and it's kind of like the relationship between a seed and the thing that a seed grows into. That's the imagery that Paul has in 1 Corinthians 15. And so there's all sorts of questions about what will be the features and the attributes of our resurrected bodies, and going all the way back to Augustine, and then with Aquinas and Gerhard and others like them, they have basically asked the question. Because the other thing that's important to say about this is that the beatific vision is not something that we experience in full until we get our resurrected bodies. Mm-hmm. So there is a kind of entrance into the beatific vision in the intermediate state, to be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord. But it is a bodily experience. It's something that we don't inherit in its consummate form until we actually receive our new bodies in the new cosmos. And so the question is, if there is a tight relationship between our resurrected bodies and the ability to experience the beatific vision, what must our resurrected bodies be? What must our spiritual bodies be like? And one of the suggestions that's brought up by Augustine, I think he's right, is basically, what if the relationship between the spiritual realm and the physical realm is much tighter? So right now, we see the glory of God in all of creation by faith in a mediate way. We have to reason basically from the things that have been made to the Maker himself. And it's not difficult. These are signs that God has given us to reveal himself to us, but it still is, we see the glory of God in the things that have been made by faith. We don't see them in an immediate way. We see them in an immediate way. And so the distinction between immediate and immediate knowledge, you can say, like, when you're looking at sort of the redness of an apple, that is immediate knowledge. You see it and it's right there. It's you don't have to, you're not sort of getting there by way of logical syllogism. I see an apple and, I'm going to conclude now that it's red, because it's immediate knowledge. But to know that the apple comes from an apple tree, that's immediate knowledge. You have to basically reason your way to get there. And so the question is, in our resurrected bodies, will we experience sight of the essence of God by way of immediate knowledge in a way that is analogous to us seeing the essence of God by way of immediate knowledge now? We see the glory of God by faith now, but that same glory, and we see the glory of God in everything by faith now. If you have eyes to see it, you're going to see the glory of God in everything, but you're seeing the glory of God by faith. And the beatific vision is seeing the glory of God by sight, by beatific sight. We're seeing God in his essence by sight. And the point that I'm trying to make is, there's a reason why we can only talk about that experience as existing in the eschaton once we have resurrected bodies and we're living in a resurrected cosmos. So the material, substantial aspect of the new heavens and the new earth is non-negotiable. We have to have it, but it's not what it is. If we don't have the beatific, and here's the other point: if we don't have the beatific vision, it's just a continuation of more of what we experience right now, and that's not a strong enough discontinuity between a seed and the thing that a seed is going to grow into, so to speak.
So is that kind of how then you balance God's because I'm thinking in terms of like God's transcendence, and yet at the same time his kind of divine incomprehensibility. Is the
Yeah.
beatific vision then striking at the core of that? How does that play into our knowledge of God, and yet God's in essence his incomprehensibility to us as finite creatures?
Totally. Yeah. So there's two really important insights to bring up there when it comes to that. The first is the centrally important role of Christ as the God man. So in one sense, all of our knowledge of God, all of our beatific knowledge of God is filtered through the person and work of Jesus. In fact, it's by virtue of our union with Christ that we're able to experience the beatific vision. His experience of the beatific vision becomes our experience of the beatific vision when we're united to him by faith, and that's every aspect of the Ordo Salutis we experience by virtue of our union with Christ, and that is going to include glorification, which is the broad category that encompasses this experience of the beatific vision. So that's one thing to point out, is that Christ, the God man, he is our Jacob's ladder. He is the place where heaven and earth meet, and he's never going to not be that. And we're never going to not be creatures. And so all of our beatific enjoyment of God in his essence is always going to be through Christ. And this is that great insight from the church fathers that sometimes it's misunderstood, but that quip that's repeated by many of the church fathers, and Athanasius puts it in his on the incarnation, that God became man so that man might become God. God became one with us so that we might become one with him. So that's one thing to point out there. But the other thing to point out is that in our union with God and our communion with God in this experience of the beatific vision, we will never cease to be creatures. And creatures, by definition, are finite. And so our knowledge of God's essence will be real, but it will never be comprehensive. And that is great news for this experience of the beatific vision, because it means that our experience of the beatific vision is never static, and it will increasingly grow and be magnified perpetually forever. So this is something that Gregory of Nyssa makes great use of in his reflections on the beatific vision, is this experience, this simultaneous experience of thirst and satiation, that as I'm experiencing the beatific vision, my capacity for delight and joy will increase constantly, even as that capacity is full to the brim constantly. So this is where that language that you get from Lewis in the Last Battle of further up and further in, this is where that's coming from. We're always going further up and further in. So I like to put it in terms of a mathematical equation. God's incomprehensibility, his infinite incomprehensibility, plus our finitude equals ever expanding joy forever.
Wow.
Just happy moment, topped by the next happiest moment, topped by the next happiest moment, without ever growing bored or anything like that forever. So it's a glorious hope.
Isn't that like a huge leap and a jump away from cherubs bored on clouds strumming harps? Man, what a gorgeous picture. That's amazing. Sam, help me map this on the Christian landscape. So you're pulling up, you're part of a retrieval project. You're citing from Christian sources throughout the centuries. What's the landscape look like as far as like beatific vision? You mentioned that some people may hear that and they think, oh, that sounds Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. How are Christian traditions handling the beatific vision? It seems like some may be a bit more keyed in than others. Can you give like a lay of the land of what that looks like right now? Because I'm sure you're probably having to dialogue with various sources as you're building this project.
Yeah. Well, it's a doctrine that was never really given up by Roman Catholics or Eastern Orthodox in the way that evangelical Protestants kind of gave it up. And so that's one of the reasons why it feels Catholic for many Protestants today. So yeah, it was never it was a doctrine that was never really jettisoned, at least at the level of theology. And so, but it's interesting because when you're telling the long story of the beatific vision throughout church history, you're really talking about everybody. And so the way that the narrative that I kind of told in my historical section, I'm being admittedly arbitrary in the people that I'm choosing to interact with and the people that I'm not, because really you could go with anybody. I had a long section that I cut from the book that was basically other Reformed and post-Reformed thinkers, and it was like a paragraph each of just probably 15 different thinkers, and the publisher said get rid of that. But like I said, up until the modern era, everybody was talking about this. It wasn't just a uniquely Roman Catholic or a uniquely Eastern Orthodox doctrine. Everybody was. But there are some differences. So the Eastern Orthodox tradition in particular, following Gregory Palamas, draws this distinction between the divine essence and divine energies. And I don't really want to get into that right now. It's a very complicated sort of picture.
Sure.
And but that sort of complicates the difference between Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic, between the Eastern and the Western view of the beatific vision. Another thing that kind of complicates the way that they or differentiates the way that they conceptualize the beatific vision is that, again, following Palamas, who is a hesychist, and that's a particular sect of asceticism in Eastern Orthodoxy. Many Eastern Orthodox believe that the beatific vision is something that you can experience in this life, and that's sort of something to. So the difference between the beatific vision now and the beatific vision in the eschaton is not a difference in kind; it's more of a difference in degree, and. So when, if you read Eastern Orthodox thinkers talk about taboric light, for example, they're talking about the light of Jesus's transfiguration. Transfiguration is very important for Eastern Orthodox theology. So, you're sort of desiring to get that experience of the beatific vision, this mystical kind of experience of kind of Paul's trip to third heaven, so to speak. The Western tradition, by contrast, has always drawn a really sharp distinction between between our experience of God, our sight of God by faith in this life, and our sight of God by beatific vision in the eschaton with our resurrected bodies. So that's one difference. The other difference is, okay, so there's all of these passages in the scriptures that talk about what seem to be differing degrees of punishment in hell and different degrees of reward in heaven. And so those are there. And many of the Protestants and Roman Catholics always agreed that, that's there. Those passages are there. So there has to be some sort of difference in degrees of rewards. And if you map that onto the conversation of the beatific vision, it would be something like different degrees of different degrees of blessedness that we're experiencing. So, I said that our capacity for enjoyment of God will expand continually. Well, that means that not all of us are expanding at the same rate. Not all of us are expanding, it's beginning at the same sort of level and sort of going on forever, that sort of thing. And all of the theologians, Roman Catholic and Protestants alike, when they're talking about the differing degrees, they always emphasize, and I think this is really important, that in the eschaton, we're actually going to love we're going to obey the law of love perfectly, where we love God as we love ourselves. We love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and we're going to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And so that means that there's no room for either resentment, jealousy and resentment. If somebody else is higher up, so to speak, on the mountain, going further up and further into Aslan's country, there's no room for jealousy or bitterness. but there's also no room for pride or, haughtiness to kind of say like, look, look how low you are compared to where I am. Because no, in the eschaton, we're going to actually fulfill the law of love perfectly. So the presence of other saints with differing degrees of blessedness will only be the occasion for more joy and more worship, because we're going to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. So as I'm going to see, you probably, Josh, further up, further expanding than me, I'm going to love you as I love myself. And when I love you as I love myself, that's not just something I'm sort of shooting for. I will fulfill that command perfectly. So that means that as I'm enjoying the beatific vision, and I see you further along than me, you're also enjoying the beatific vision. I love you as I love myself. My enjoyment of God just doubled exactly 2 times. And then I look over, to my right, and so it's tripled and then quadrupled, and it just expands beyond reckoning. So the difference, the presence of other believers and other angels in heaven, in the eschaton, the proliferation of other people who are all sort of experiencing different degrees of blessedness will only serve to give me more joy in the eschaton. So again, Protestants, Roman Catholics agree on that. But where they disagree is what accounts for the different degrees of blessedness.
Right.
And the Roman Catholic perspective, and this is where Thomas Aquinas comes in, he says merit. It is your merit that basically gives you different degrees of blessedness. And this is where the Protestant contribution comes in. Francis Turretin comes along and addresses Thomas directly and says, no, it's not merit, because the only merit that gives us the beatific vision in the eschaton is the merit of Christ that is imputed to us. So his merit is the only merit that gets us any enjoyment of the beatific vision. And he attributes it rather to the wisdom of God, in the same way that he distributes gifts discriminately in this life. He distributes gifts discriminately in the life to come. And all of it is going to serve for our joy and for his glory. And but that is where the difference would be. So some people have exaggerated. You'll see in the book, if you ever read it, there's a section in there where I'm trying to adjudicate between some contemporary debates between the relationship between John Owen and Thomas Aquinas. And it's not uncommon for people to make the argument that Owen is improving upon Aquinas because of what he perceives as a Christological deficiency in Aquinas's account of the beatific vision. I'm not convinced by that. I argue in the book that's not what Thomas is what Owen is doing, but he is enriching the overall doctrine of the beatific vision by bringing more Christological focus. And then Jonathan Edwards comes along and he enriches our greater vision of the beatific vision by bringing a greater emphasis on pneumatology. So Owen with Christology, and Edwards with pneumatology, and then, like I mentioned, Francis Turretin with bringing a reformed understanding of soteriology to bear on the doctrine of the beatific vision. So I would say that the difference between the Protestant conception and the Roman Catholic conception is not really substantial in terms of the experience of the beatific vision per se. It's more of a difference in the theology that undergirds it, the soteriology, for example, that undergirds it, or the experience of the intermediate state. We don't Protestants reject purgatory outright, and purgatory is an important part of Roman Catholic dogma. So that goes into sort of preparing the person for the beatific vision as well. And we would say, no, all the preparation for the beatific vision happens in this life. We're being sanctified and being prepared for the beatific vision right now. So there's differences, but they're differences that aren't necessarily on the doctrine of the beatific vision per se, but rather on those key primary differences that distinguish Protestants from Roman Catholics in other areas.
So, first of all, that was awesome and super helpful. So thank you. But so you mentioned Lewis a couple times with the further up and further in. I didn't plan on asking this, but do you think he's keying in on that? He's talking about
Oh
the
yeah.
further up and further in. I know you've written a lot on Lewis. Is this in the background of what he's getting at? And is that maybe why some
Oh
people
yeah.
really were confused with that last book in the series?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of reasons why people are confused by the last book, but yeah, I think Lewis is my relationship with Lewis has just been enriched in the years as I've grown, because as I've grown, I've kind of become more and more familiar with the primary sources that he was living in,
Yeah.
and I'm drawing all of these. Oh, that's where he got that from. The Great Divorce is essentially his version of Dante's Purgatorio. It's a and he tells it as an allegory of sanctification, the Christian life. Tells it as an allegory, which I think is the best way to read Dante's Purgatorio. But yeah, so it's not surprising at all to me that as I'm sort of delving into the tradition and sort of trying to retrieve this doctrine of the beatific vision, I hear Lewis everywhere. I'm set the things that my sort of responses are Lewis responses to the
Right.
things that I'm reading. So yeah, that's not accidental. He's not, and he wasn't really he wasn't he was not a modern thinker.
Right.
He was an ancient thinker. He was a pre-modern thinker. The theology, he read a lot of theology, but he didn't read a lot of modern theology. He hardly read modern theology. So the theology he's writing and the theology that's shaping his imagination is the theology of the pre-modern Christian tradition.
Right.
So yeah, that's not accidental.
Yeah. No, okay. So this book, this book that you're writing, the Beatific Vision, like I guess an unintended consequence. People might enjoy Lewis more now if you if you read that and then read the other. Sam, I know
I sure hope so.
yeah, no, absolutely. I know we're running a little bit short on time, but you'd mentioned something about sort of that I think you phrased it as the irreducible eschatological character of Christianity. We've been talking about this. I think it's been through and through with especially with that segment that you were just speaking through. But walk me into that just a little bit, because one of the things we've tried to talk through on the channel is we've tried to talk about eschatology as a big story, just at its very base value, something that's not relegated to the millennium, but instead something that kind of is the warp and woof of the story that God's written. You talked though about not just the biblical story, but as the character of Christianity itself is sort of irreducibly eschatological. That might be a
Yeah.
good place to try to land the plane. Walk me into that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Well, just to stick with the beatific vision, the beatific vision, the experience of the beatific vision is the chief end of man. The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. That's what we want. When Augustine says, you've made us for yourself and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. That's the beatific vision, finding our rest in you. So we are made as creatures with a telos. And that intended telos is the experience of the beatific vision in the eschaton. And we're living within a story. So I think that's the right way to put it. We're living in a story that has an ending. And we've been given the cheat code. We've been given, sort of this is where everything is going. We can see where the story concludes. But that is, there is a real sense in which all of human history has a teleology, and the teleology is eschatology. It's the eschaton. It is the conclusion of the story. And so there is a sense in which all aspects of the Christian life are eschatological, and all aspects of theology are eschatological. This is something that Voss put really pithily, that eschatology precedes soteriology.
Right.
Now, it doesn't precede soteriology at the subjective experiential level. I experienced the initial aspects of the Ordo Salutis before I experienced the eschaton. But I've been made a new creature. I've been made a new creation for the new creation. So creation basically it was set in motion with a purpose of coming to its eschatological rest in God. A lot of people miss this. When God creates the Sabbath, when he rests on the seventh day, and on the seventh day, God rested. That wasn't for him. He wasn't tired. He wasn't growing tired or something like that. That's a hint at what the whole cosmos is created for. God, after God creates the apex of his creation, which is man, and he places all of creation under man, he then enters into a state of rest. And so that state of theological Sabbath is this created domain that all of creation is supposed to be brought into. And the fact that he doesn't enter into that rest until after he's made man and brought everything under man's subjection means that creation was never going to enter into that Sabbath eschatological rest outside of the federal headship of a man, of an actual human being. So Adam forfeit that. We've been through this whole process of redemptive history to basically have that promise reestablished in Christ. But that is his role. He is doing what Adam was supposed to do and never actually did by bringing all of his posterity, and therefore underneath them all of creation itself, under him into that state of eschatological rest. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of people talk about this. You're very familiar with this on, and your listeners are familiar with this on this channel, that the incarnation and the crucifixion and the resurrection and the ascension of Christ, these are all deeply eschatological events. It is the new age breaking into the old in an inaugurated sense. And so that's where all of us Christians and all of our theologizing, who we are as Christians united to Christ, who we are as the body of Christ, our ecclesiology, we are an eschatological people. We are a people who are standing at the very edge of the story with the end already broken in. And even if you're post-millennial and you think that we're in the early church, that still is who we are. We're an eschatological people where the end has already sort of broken into the present in an inaugurated sense, and we're waiting forward for the eschaton. Right. And this is something that I think that's an emphasis that Christians really need to sort of reclaim, is this sense of hope. That was such a huge part for the early Christians. It's not an accident that, when you're thinking about like the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed, we are talking about non-negotiables for Christians in the earliest stages of the history of the church. And so anything that's included in the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed is going to be really, really important stuff. Mm. So the fact that that the Apostles' Creed ends with, I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen. It is holding before the vision of those early Christians. This is who we are. We are a people who look forward to the end. We're a people who are part of the end already. We're part of this new creation, and we're looking forward to the end. Yeah. Or the Nicene Creed, we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord and giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son, who with the Father and the Son together is worshipped and glorified. He spoke by the prophets. We believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic church. We acknowledge one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. And we look for the resurrection of the dead and the life, the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Hmm. So I think that, talking about retrieval, this might be an aspect of Christian theology that we need to retrieve, is this constant forward-looking kind of hope for the eschaton, recognizing that the beginning of the end has already been established with the arrival of Christ, and that is that we are defined as an eschatological people, as a people of another kingdom, of another age. That's who we are, and so it should shape all of our theology.
That's so encouraging, because just thinking of, like you said, there's not probably a monolithic answer to most questions, and this one included, but just looking to many ways that Protestant Christianity has sort of drifted a bit from its trajectory, or maybe from its roots, you could say, and how a lot of these things, including the story to which we're anchored, you see in many cases, a neglect or even a aversion to the creeds, the confessions, those sort of things that profess this hope, This is encouraging just to hear this retrieval of not only where we've been, but also the story that we're tethered to. And the Christians have always found themselves tethered to. But Sam, we probably need to land the plane. Mention again, please, for me, the book, because again, it's September 2nd, I believe, is the publication date. But also, where are you active? You're on the Twitter X, but where can people follow you, brother?
Yeah. So the book is To Gaze Upon God. And you can pre-order it now, or you can just wait a few days for it to come out. Yeah, September 2nd is the official release date. So I hope it's a useful book. It is the most enjoyable writing project I've undertaken to date.
Wow.
And so just so refreshing and worshipful from beginning to end. And so I hope that it is enriching and helpful for folks. But yeah, I'm on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, but Samuel Parkison. You can search for me there, Parkison. You can basically find other stuff through there. I write at Credo Mag often, and then I also have a blog that I think is linked on my Twitter page as well. So and then if anybody on here ever finds their way in the UAE, it's a pretty small country. So just enjoying our time over here in the Middle East, occasionally coming back to the US. But you pretty much need to interact with me online unless you want to make the 15-hour flight over here. So.
Oof. Goodness, man. Well, thanks, Sam. I know it's late there for you, so thanks for carving out the time. But thanks for this project. This has been massively encouraging. So, thanks so much for joining us, brother.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Seated here at my right hand, the